Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. Thanks so very much for joining us tonight. It's going to be a good show, and I'm really looking forward to it. First off, though, I want to thank Ken Quiet Hawk and his wife, Deb, for how they have so honorably preserved traditions of Native storytellers. They are an amazing couple. Check them out on the internet. They have provided some amazing stories, and I do believe their CDs are still available. So, getting on to tonight, I can't wait. This is the kind of topic that I love to get my teeth into: lunatic asylums and ghosts and all sorts of things. So, I'm going to turn it over to Mark because he's got control of this one. There you go, Mark.
Thanks. How are you, Barbara?
Doing well.
Good. Okay. We had a very informative show yesterday, and we got a whole bunch of really exciting new people coming up through February and starting to book up March. So we have a terrific couple months of Monday and Tuesday shows lined up for everyone. The other lovely Sherry in my life, Sherry the Yinzer, is tuned in and is about to hear paranormal happenings from her beloved Western Pennsylvania. When one watches the ghost hunting TV shows, many of the locations are exotic. Appalachia isn't usually considered an exotic destination. Most of the time, Appalachia just isn't even considered. But we do have a rich prehistory with the Kanawha Valley as the premier necropolis for giants. There's the Mothman, Flatwoods Monster, and we'll be getting into some new destinations tonight, like Ohio's Zoar Village, the Nemacolin Castle, the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Our guest is Sherri Brake. She is the author of several books on the paranormal. She is a frequent lecturer at paranormal events such as the Mothman Festival and the Kent Stage with George Norrie. Maybe you saw her die during a Civil War reenactment. And Sherri has a tour company that leads groups through many haunted houses, villages, prisons, and she does international tours to Ireland and Scotland. You can learn more about Sherri at her website, hauntedhistory.net. Hi, Sherri.
Hey, Mark. Hello, Barbara. How are you guys doing tonight?
Oh, fine. This is, our usual Monday and Tuesday lineup, and we're just glad you're a part of it.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I've really been looking forward to it, and I enjoy the wide array of subjects that you both have. So it's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, you're going to be broadening that here over the next couple hours. You have, and I probably should mention some of your books right here at the beginning. Haunted Stark County, Ohio, The Haunted History of the Ohio State Reformatory, The Haunted History of the West Virginia Penitentiary, Fireside Folklore of West Virginia, Volume 1. We'll get into your Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum book. You have two more in the works that we'll talk about in a little bit. But you do these paranormal investigations. You're in West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky. You have one coming up, and it's going to be at the Nemacolin Castle. I've driven past this place numerous times. It's a beautiful old house. I've never gone inside of it, which I regret not doing that. But could do a field trip sometime. But
you should.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to do that at some point. But the Nemacolin Castle isn't a topic heard on late night radio, but we want to hear about it from you. What is there to draw you to bring a group of people for a paranormal investigation of this property? So, tell us a little bit about this
Sure.
castle.
I will. When I first began Haunted Heartland Tours, which is my tour company, back in about 2003, I started off with a foundation of history. Since I was a Civil War reenactor, I was always drawn to the history of locations. And as a paranormal researcher and investigator for almost 30 years, I have loved history. History to me is the foundation of what I build my investigation upon. And when I do my tours, I love to give people that information, that history, the architecture, the background of where we're going to be investigating. And, that's why I love Nemacolin Castle. It's not one of the big, bad buildings that you see, that is beaten to death on a lot of these paranormal television shows. You see the same places over and over and over again. And I love these little gems, these little off the, beaten trail locations to take people to explore. And Nemacolin Castle is just that. It is actually the third oldest castle in the United States. And it's more like a castle home. It's not what you would envision, like, the castles of England and Ireland and Scotland and Germany and whatnot like that. I mean, it does have a crenellated tower. It is beautiful. It sets up on the hillside, and it has a very commanding presence. And the history of not only the building, but of that site dates back to, French and Indian time, and even before that as well. And, being into the paranormal, when you have a building upon building upon building upon a prehistoric site, you really up your chances of getting something to happen when you do your investigation. It's a fascinating building. And like I said, it sits up on the hillside over top of the Mon River. It was built around the original trading post, which was occupied that site earlier. It was the site of Fort Burd, B-U-R-D, and it was built by British colonists during the French and Indian War. The construction on the castle's gone, through different time frames, continued on through the Victorian era, and only one family ever occupied it, and that was the Bowman family. So sometimes it's referred to as Bowman's Castle as well as Nemacolin Castle. So you've got it being built, in the 1770s, 1780s, and it's an amazing building because even as you're walking up the hillside to it, you get that vibe, you get that feeling, you get that essence that this is really a cool place. There were things that happened here throughout the years, and I really believe that layers itself upon the atmosphere, and that people can feel that, when they go there to investigate. So I'm really looking forward on getting back there in April and investigating it. It's really a cool location to explore.
Yeah, it's the third oldest castle in the United States. Is that right?
Right. I think the oldest one, I believe, is in Virginia. It was probably built back in the 1650s. I think it's in Surrey, Virginia, and then the next one on the list is Castillo de San Marcos. I think that was about 1670, 1680, and then you've got Bowman's Castle or Newman's Castle that was started in 1789. So the cool thing is, there's only been one family that lives in there, the Bowman family. Very rich history, and a lot of the furniture that is in that building is still the original furniture, and there's clothing. You can open up some of these closets and see these old dresses and nightgowns and things that they wore throughout the years. It's still there, and all that stuff carries energy.
Is there something that happened within the walls of the castle to make it haunted?
Well, as far as it being built on the site of a fort, that there had to have been some violence that occurred back during that time frame. And the fact that it was right off of Nemacolin's path or trail, which was that's an ancient Native American trail that crossed through the mountains there. So you've got that indigenous people that used that pathway, and probably, of course, used it to do some of their raids, of course, back in the day. So you've got that early frontier history with the Delawares and the Shawnee and the Iroquois and, all those Native Americans. We've got some pretty unusual things that have happened inside the building there at the castle. On some of our investigations, of course, people have smelled smoke. I've had a couple people tell me it was like black powder that they smelled, which, of course, you could link that back to the frontier days.
Right.
We've had some folks that have seen shadow people walking up and down the hallway, and it's really a cool place to explore, and I just really can't wait to get back. We do a small group hunt is what we do, so we only take 25 people.
Okay, and you have said that there's a cistern in the basement.
Right.
Does that play any kind of role with water being in the house? And you already said it sits on this commanding knoll overlooking the Monongahela River. So it's there's water all in the house, over the hill from it. How does water play a role?
Yeah, I think that having the water feature there, whether it's something on the property and it's underground, or you have the cistern in the building, I think that can at times enhance paranormal activity. Whether it's a conduit or it holds the energy, I'm not sure. I don't think any of us really know for sure. But the fact that that building, is built with sandstone, limestone, that crystal quartz content to it, I think that magnifies the energy. Just like some of these other large places that I investigate, the Ohio State Reformatory, the West Virginia Penitentiary, buildings like that are built with the crystal in the walls, the quartz in the walls. I think it holds the energy. It's like a battery, and I think you bring into ley lines, underground water systems, a cistern in the basement there, Nemacolin Castle being perched on the hillside on a main river off of a main Indian trail. I think you've just really got the recipe right there for paranormal activity.
Yeah, you were just bringing up the like foundations and some of the other some buildings are made out from brick, and you have a number of different construction materials.
Mm-hmm.
Which is there like sandstone in
limestone?
It's a little bit of everything at Nemacolin Castle.
Yes. Because it's been added on throughout the years. So you have different materials. When you originally walk into the building, you wouldn't think that it was a castle because you walk into an area with a hearth and some logs, and you get a very rustic feeling because you're entering into the oldest part of the building, which was originally part of the fort.
So, Sherri, what does the water in the basement and the water in the Mon or the Monongahela River have to do with the paranormal investigations and hauntings within the house?
Well, that's a good question, and of course, with investigating the paranormal, we've got nothing but theories to go on, because we don't know for sure. But for me, with having almost 30 years of experience with investigating and researching, I find that locations and houses that have water on the property seem to have more paranormal activity than those that do not, whether it is an underground water system, a river, or a cistern in the basement like at Nemacolin Castle. I don't know if it is a conduit for earth energy or it helps hold the energy there or brings energy to the property. I don't know. I just find that with my experience that it seems like locations like this are more active with water in the area. And of course, you're talking about the castle sitting on the hillside overlooking the Mon River, being on the Native American Indian path, Nemacolin's Trail. And I think all of that, all the thousands of people that have traveled through the area, they bring their energy. You've got the energy of the water of the Mon River. You've got the energy of the water being in the basement. You have the building itself being built of various materials, some of these containing quartz or crystal with limestone, sandstone, building materials. So I think it all kind of factors in to the paranormal activity and how much of it that you have there at the castle.
Okay, and since you do dowsing, have you picked up anything about ley lines running through the property, the water source doing something unusual? Have you investigated that angle yet?
I have not doused the property on the outside of the building. I have only done throughout the building, and it's probably around 16,000 square feet. I've done inside the building. I can tell you from personal experience, though, that wherever there are major waterways, there are usually ley lines. And, of course, this is true especially throughout the Ohio River Valley. So, you know, and I think, you know, the fact that this building, you know, 1,200 years ago, before the construction of the fort or the castle or the trading post, you have these prehistoric indigenous peoples that had built some type of earthwork mound there at that site. So you have the layer upon layer upon layer of different peoples, different cultures, being above a major waterway, having a cistern in the basement, having the building with the quartz and the crystal content, having the same family live in that building from the very beginning, the Bowman family, having all of their antiques and their clothing still present in the building. I think all of it just adds up for a recipe of activity in that building.
Okay. And yeah, I'm not sure how much. I don't think we've repeated too much before our good buddies at the NSA kicked us off the air. So I don't want to go back over too much of you know the same material of the Nemacolin Castle, but you know since you were you know discussing the layers upon layers of you know,
building materials and different people.
Yeah, and you know, like the Irish and German immigrants, you know, moving into you know the eastern seaboard and pushing west a little bit. You know, we could look at other you know regions of Appalachia, you know, like the Whipple company store that you know, you cover in your Fireside Folklore of West Virginia, Volume 1. What's the? Yeah, that's you know, you bring up some of the more infamous aspects of the Appalachian region. Can you tell us a little bit about what makes that unique building so historical, you know, representative of the area?
Well, you know, you brought up details there about the, you know, the Scots-Irish immigrants coming into the area and the Germans and pushing westward. And, you know, when they came and they settled throughout the Appalachian Mountains, of course, they brought their trades with them, their beliefs, their stories, their music, you know, the traditions that they had. And I love living where I live in central West Virginia because I'm surrounded by mountains. I'm surrounded by folklore. I'm surrounded by these little off the beaten path gems, as I love to call them, that have paranormal activity. And the Whipple Coal Company store in Fayette County, West Virginia, is one of those. I have rented that building out for ghost hunts. I've done investigations on that property for probably about the last 10 years. The building has sold as of last year, so we have a new owner that is owning the building. So it'll be interesting to see what he does with it. But the building was built back in during the coal mining wars, back in the heyday. It's fascinating history there because not only when you go into an area and you open up mines and a company comes in and builds their company store, you know, they hire the coal miners, they build the company store, the coal miners are paid in scrip. It's a special type of coin that is only good at that location, at that general store. So the Whipple Coal Company store was owned by a man by the name of Justice Collins, and he built this building for his general store. On the third level, top level of the building, he had a ballroom. So they would have all these grand parties there as well. Of course, the coal miners aren't invited to that. This would be other prestigious people in the area, the shakers and movers of the area that would be invited to that. The Whipple coal mining store, in the basement, they embalmed over 5,000 coal miners.
Wow.
These were coal miners that died from epidemics, died from different diseases, were killed in mining accidents, and they would be brought into the basement of the Whipple coal mining store, and they would be embalmed. Somebody would pray over them. They would be wrapped up in a linen or a quilt and put in a casket and taken and buried locally. Now, the women of that community who were married to the coal miners would not be embalmed if they passed, only the men. This building was built on the site of a native Indian burial ground. Now, you hear stories about that. You hear stories about people will say, oh, it's probably built upon a burial ground. It's hearsay. With this building, it is not hearsay because they actually had a college come and they did archaeological digs on the grounds of the Whipple coal mining store and found bodies, various bodies buried throughout the area there. So it is a documented burial site for Native American Indians. You've got some murders that occurred inside of the building. There was a man that was found hanging in the elevator shaft. There were people that had been murdered. They were shot on the steps entering into the general store. So this was a very violent period in West Virginia history with the coal mining wars. So you have the owners who are, of course, against the unions, and you have the workers that want the unions there. Mm-hmm. So you would often have, gunfights, battles, and whatnot. And there were 5 or 6 deaths, I believe, that were documented there at the Whipple coal mining store. It's a pretty cool building. I've done investigations there. I've had overnight ghost hunts, and I've also instructed ghost hunting classes on site in the building before we do the investigation. It'll be interesting to see what kind of a new chapter that this building has with the new owner.
Okay, and there was a hanging in the elevator?
Hanging in the elevator shaft. It was one of those old hand crank freight elevators.
Right.
And the story that I got from the owner, she ran a museum in the building and she did all the research and she led daytime tours and whatnot. And she had a strong connection to the area and to its history. And she had told me that there was a poker game that was going on late one evening after hours, and apparently the guy that was winning, who was ahead of the game, mm-hmm. Didn't make it out of the building alive that night, and he ended up being the one that was accidentally hanged inside the elevator shaft. Accidentally. Figure that one out.
Just like we accidentally went off the air for 10 minutes. I had no idea that happened.
Accidentally. But there were other accidental deaths in the Whipple store as well. Another one took place in a room that they called the grain room. The grain room is the room that would have, the sugar, the salt, the different grains, your flour, and you would come in and you would use your scrip that you had been paid in, and you mm-hmm. would go into the grain room and you would get 5 pounds of this, 10 pounds of that, and you'd pick up your coffee and whatever. And one morning, the shopkeeper came in and opened up the door to the grain room, and there was a man whose upper body was found buried down inside a bag of grain. So he accidentally suffocated, is what the report said. And you have to remember, these coal mining barons that owned these coal mining communities and towns, they also wrote the newspaper. There was a newspaper that was also printed in the basement of the Whipple coal mining store, so they could report however and whatever they wanted to.
Okay, and you do document bullet holes fired from the outside that have left marks inside the building?
They went through. It went through. There's a big plate glass window up above the door of the entryway to the Whipple Coal Company store.
Mm-hmm.
And when the owner first purchased the property, she thought that maybe somebody had driven by and had just shot the front of the building up, on a whim. And then after she started talking to locals and doing investigating it and researching the property, she found out that was from an actual shootout from probably around the 1920s, I think it was, and that they had never changed the window. And here she was getting ready to replace history. And it's still visible today. I mean, if you drive by and pull up in the parking lot there, of course, the building is closed up now, but you can stand outside and you can see the bullet holes across the front of the building there.
Well, it's just one of those interesting aspects of regional history that a lot of people may not realize how violent the union and
very violent.
I was trying. Just the control over the local economy. It's might seem stereotypical, but that is the way things were at what we're talking like the 1890s to the 1920s, that kind of like time period.
Right. Yeah, the building was originally built right around 1890. So, and that is correct. And it's a bloody history in southern West Virginia because of all the mines and the mine wars and what was going on. Sure, they gave you a job. Sure, they gave you company housing. Sure, they had a company doctor that would come and see you. But what a price you paid. I remember one story, there was a gentleman that came to the coal mining store there at Whipple, and he tried to purchase something with scrip from another coal mining company, and they shot him dead on the spot.
What was it? They just didn't like the idea of competition.
Right. Sure. How dare you come in here to our general store? How dare you come and try to pay, with scrip from another company?
Okay, so
yeah.
Let's move from the Whipple Company store to one of the places that you visit on a regular basis that it's a complete change of lifestyle. But there's still this paranormal pall, might be the right word, hanging over it. It's the Zoar Village. That's a really unique story as well. I'm sure most of the listeners are going to be interested in how's this village become haunted?
Right.
Give us the background there.
Oh, yeah. I love Zoar, Ohio, and I really wish somebody would do a movie or a documentary on this little quaint historic village. The basic history is, of course, we live in 21st century America. We would find it very difficult to imagine living without some kind of religious freedom. But that's exactly what brought these people from Germany to Zoar in 1817. You go back to Germany here. You've got a group of people who are not happy, hundreds and hundreds of people who are not happy with the Lutheran Church at the time in 1870. They didn't believe in several things that the Lutheran Church believed in. For instance, they did not believe that marriage was a religious ceremony. They believed it to be more of a contract between a man and a woman. They did not believe in removing their hat and curtsying or bowing to the king and queen. They thought that you should only do that to God. So this caused a lot of grief for them in Germany. They would be beaten in public for their beliefs. Husbands and wives would be separated. Children would be taken away. I hate to compare it to, the Nazis and the Jews, but in a way, that's the type of atmosphere that you had back then, to the point that these poor people hid out in the Black Forest. They had some Quakers that helped them. They gathered together, they banded together, they got enough money to get passage to America. And they came to America and they purchased property in Tuscarawas County, Ohio, which is just south of Canton, Ohio, by about half an hour. Mm-hmm. And they settled their own community. Now, the reason they picked that area in Tuscarawas County and in Ohio is kind of unique. There was a woman in Switzerland by the name of Barbara Gruberman, and Barbara was a trance medium. She was a spiritualist. She could put herself into trances, and she could prophesize. And the Zoarites, these German separatists in Germany, found this woman, and she kind of became their spiritualistic mother. And she had a vision of them coming to America and starting their own community. And they wanted her to come with them to America, but she passed away, unfortunately. She was sick and she passed away. She could not make the trip. So you have this group of 200 people coming over, 1817. It takes them months, of course, to cross the Atlantic Ocean. By wagon, they come down into Tuscarawas County and they settle, and they plant crops, they fell the trees, they build cabins, they start their own community with their own beliefs, their own convictions. And in a way, they're like the Amish. They kept to themselves. They didn't like outsiders. Well, in 1833, they've got the bright idea to build a hotel, the Zoar Hotel. Beautiful building, 3 stories tall, has a cupola up on top of it. It is still standing today. And when they built this building back in 1833, they knew it would draw outsiders in, but I don't think they realized what kind of an effect it would have on the Zoarites. Because, see, you have young girls and you have young men who are being raised in the way of Zoar, to not use money, to not dress fancifully, to be very plain and very simple. Well, you build this hotel, and what does it do? It brings in all of this money. It brings in all of these people and these beautiful carriages. President McKinley would come and have lunch at the Zoar Hotel from his home in Canton. And you bring in greed, because now you've got these young Zoar boys and girls who see money, who see all these grand parties taking place at this hotel, and they start to rethink the way that they've been brought up and the way that they've been raised. Maybe Zoar's not for me. Maybe I'll leave. Again, kind of like the Amish. Many of the Zoarites believed that when they built that hotel, they cursed the town. The separatist community there lasted until 1897, and then they disbanded. So the buildings in this village are owned by the Ohio Historical Society, which is now the Ohio History Connection. Mm-hmm. And they own a handful of buildings, and I basically rent the town out. And we have our investigation there after hours into the building. We do the Zoar Hotel. We do the Zoar Bakery. We do a grand mansion, which is called the Number One House, that was built for the spiritualist father of Zoar. And then we investigate the tin shop, and we also investigate the Zoar Garden, which is absolutely beautiful. Very, very large garden area. Very spiritual garden as well. And we've had activity in every single building that we investigate at. It really is a very interesting historical village.
Okay. Hey, Sherri, I think we got cut off again.
Oh, okay.
No,
you're still here. You're still here.
Oh, we are?
That's good.
You're fine.
Oh, gee. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. I just it sounded like we went off the air. Okay. So we have outsiders arriving to Zoar. Is there something that happens that initiates the paranormal atmosphere at this village?
Not really. I mean, you don't have any violence. There's no murders. It's not a site of executions. They weren't burning witches. It was nothing like that. There's a lot of folklore in the area. And one of them would be ghost lights or ghost balls that people would see floating throughout the area at night. Now, of course, you've got frontiersmen, you've got settlers, you've got people who are afraid of things that they cannot explain. So for them to be walking through the woods at night and looking out across the field and seeing these glowing balls of light floating caused quite a commotion. And of course, now we know that could be, swamp gas or something along those lines. But back then, they believed that these mysterious lights were ghosts or spirits that were floating throughout the area. So you have that folklore. But as far as some big, accident happening or some tragedy or something like that happening there, you don't have that. What you do have is a village that was based basically on a medium in a trance. And you have these people coming and believing that their precious Zoar hotel is cursed and is part of the reason to blame for the demise of the society. This community, this village, when it was first organized and taken over by the Ohio Historical Society, they gave daytime tours, and they still do give daytime tours in the village. You have people that are dressed in period attire that walk around that will lead you around in small groups and tell you about the Zoarites. So, of course, this is started back in the 1970s. Well, you have these tour guides taking people throughout the buildings, and occasionally weird things would happen while they would be on tour. For instance, they would be in a room in the hotel, and they would be giving their, history spiel, and they would hear the sounds of children laughing upstairs. Well, the tour guide would go upstairs thinking, what's going on? Who's in this old building? It's supposed to be just us. And they hear footsteps running around and children laughing. Well, they go upstairs, and there's nobody there. The building would be locked up at night. People would be passing by on the street, on the sidewalk, and they would hear a baby crying or children laughing inside the building. So they would call the local police department and say, I think we've got children. Somebody's locked inside this building. After hours, we need to come here and open this building up and see what's going on. And they would never find anybody. In the number one building, the old mansion building, that's very grand building that was built for Joseph Bymiller. He was the spiritualist leader of Zoar, and he lived in the building for a short time. In that building, we have a story from a worker, a volunteer who was there giving a daytime tour, and it was quiet. She was in the building by herself, and she just strolled down the hallway, and she saw what she thought was another volunteer at the end of the hallway. And the volunteer walked down the hall and went into a room. So our tour guide goes down through the hallway to follow to see who this other volunteer was, and she walks into a room. There's only one way in and one way out, and there's nobody standing in the room. So you have these stories that have happened for, the last 30 years of the Ohio Historical Society giving these daytime tours.
Oh, okay. And if people like your research or presentations, you're also going to be doing a conference in Alton, Illinois, in the spring, and we'll give you a chance to discuss that. And hopefully you'll have your maps there of like the state of Ohio, because I do want to use the map to lead into some of the cryptids in the area, like Grassman. So if you want to plug your upcoming appearance, and then we can ease into the Grassman.
Oh, sure. I have one of my favorite conferences, annual conference, is taking place June 26th through the 27th in Alton, Illinois, and it is the Haunted America Conference. And it is organized and led by Troy Taylor. And Troy Taylor has written hundreds of books. He's a speaker. He heads up his own tour company. He organizes this, and it is a big, big conference. There's a lot of speakers that are going to be there this year. Jennifer Jones from the Dead History, Seth Breedlove from Small Town Monsters is going to be there, Richard Eastep. Yeah, Richard Eastep, April Slaughter. There's a lot of great speakers. I'm going to be there as well. It is a fascinating weekend. So if you're interested in not only just ghosts, but cryptids, the paranormal, the unexplained, there's lots of after-hour workshops to do, ghost hunts, and it is fun. And this is the, I want to say, I think it's the 19th year for the conference. 19th, 20th year for it. Yeah, it's been going on a while. So I'm looking forward to it, and it always sells out. So I suggest that people, if they're interested in it, just to do a Google search for Haunted America Conference, and it'll pop up, and you can buy tickets and plan your weekend in Alton. There's a lot to do in that area, and it's a lot of fun to do. I really look forward to that conference.
Okay. Sounds good.
And I've got other conferences going on too as well, but that's I hate to say that's my favorite child right now, but that is my favorite child right now. They're all like my children.
Okay, and when I think you were doing your making a local stop on your Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum book tour, that was where I got your map of Ohio, and you're covering all the Bigfoot sightings, UFO sightings, like the Grassman.
Mm-hmm.
I think Grassman is a new cryptid for us to introduce to our listeners. What's the story behind Grassman?
Well, I think it depends on who you talk to. It's like, give me your theory on ghosts and the paranormal, and you ask 10 people, and you kind of get different opinions. What I know of is that it's one of the most legendary cryptids in Ohio. The Grassman is. Sometimes he's referred to as the Eastern Bigfoot. And when you've got a creature that's 7 foot tall and 300 pounds, who's going to argue with whatever name you want to call him by? But sightings on that hidden Ohio map that you spoke of, they range all over the state. There's some in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. There are some south of Canton, Ohio, and the Minerva area. Lauren Coleman, very famous cryptozoologist.
Mm-hmm.
He says that the Ohio Grassmen, they have a more human-like appearance and are more human-looking than what you would call the Bigfoot. and they happen to be a little bit shorter than Bigfoot as well. So, there have been hundreds of sightings all over Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, all over the East Coast. And I guess it just depends on who you talk to as to whether it's a Grassman or if it's a Bigfoot sighting.
Okay. We may have to investigate that topic in more detail.
For sure.
Yeah, that's one of the. I've heard a police officer, friend of mine, talk about he had to investigate that because of some sighting, and it was a new cryptid introduced to me a few years ago, but it's not as well known as
correct.
Quite a few other ones. Cover some of the white wolves, kind of like werewolf type creatures in your Fireside Folklore book. But there are those cryptids in the area. We've approached under the first hour, getting to the second one. Still have some of your major investigations to get into. So might as well start on that now. You've done a lot of research.
Okay, Mark seems to be caught between words here or something, because he is definitely... Mark, we can't hear you. So if you are still listening, there is no sound coming from you nor her. And are you there?
I'm here. I can hear Mark, and I can hear you, Barbara.
You can't hear me?
Okay,
I can hear
now
you.
I can.
Yes, Mark.
You're back. You weren't there a minute ago. Something's kind of screwy here, but okay, keep going, guys. I'm here.
Okay. So Sherri, you've participated in Civil War reenactments. You've gone to the major Civil War battlefields. You've gone to the more of like the skirmishes in West Virginia, but one of your major research projects that was constructed post-Civil War was the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. What is the legacy of the Civil War at this building?
Well, the building that you're talking about is a Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum,
right?
And for the sake of having to say all those words, I like to call it TAWA. It goes by TAWA, PALA, of course. It's also known as the Western State Hospital. National Historic Landmark. I have investigated it since it opened for tours. And I've done numerous investigations there. I've done many overnighters with group tours that have come here. The building it's had multiple names. I mean, it's been called the Western State Hospital, the Western Virginia Lunatic Asylum, and now, of course, it's Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, which was the original name. And they did begin building this before the Civil War, and it was interrupted for a time frame because they basically ran out of money. Because if you remember, your West Virginia history, West Virginia was not a state until 1863.
Mm-hmm.
So, that when this building was built, there was a lot of chaos in Virginia, chaos across the nation with the outbreak of the war between the states. And, the building of the building was stalled out for a while there, and then they got their money together, and they had Civil War raids. There was a gold robbery there in town. I mean, this building really was being constructed during a very chaotic time frame. Again, very, very large building, the second largest stone-cut building in the world behind the Kremlin. And
Wow.
It's made of limestone. You've got that quartz, crystal content of this building. You have a building that was built to house the insane. But it wasn't only the insane that were taken there as patients and brought inside that building. For instance, some of the first admissions were women that were suffering from menopause. Back in those days, of course, we didn't really know what menopause was. We didn't know what Alzheimer's was. We didn't know what post-traumatic stress syndrome was. We weren't sure of what these illnesses were. We just knew that these people were not right. They were different from us. And so then, back in the day, your husband, if you suffered from menopause, could simply sign his name to a piece of paper and have you committed. And the glory of it for the men back in the day is if you had a wife that you couldn't stand, you could come up with some kind of an excuse and drop her off at the asylum. And often you could have the children taken there with your wife. So you have women that suffer from menopause. You have Civil War soldiers who are suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome, I'm sure. You've got women, young girls who are unwed mothers, and the family is greatly embarrassed by this pregnancy that's illegitimate, and they could have you committed there as well. So, there was a lot of that going on back in the early days of the asylum.
It really, after hearing, more, you go into it more extensively on your library lecture tour. It's just really creepy. The kinds of it really seems like it was experimenting, doing medical experiments on people.
Well, they were. They weren't sure what was going to work. Let's try this approach. You go back and look at the history of psychiatry in Europe with some of the methods that they would try to cure you. One apparatus was a big chair that they would strap you down into, and they would crank this chair up, and they would spin you for like an hour in this chair. And the belief was that they would balance the fluid in your body. If you were unbalanced, the way to get you balanced would be to shake you up and spin you around. They're going to try anything. At the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, they would do ice pick lobotomies, which basically ended up making you in almost a vegetative state. You lost all personality when that procedure was done. Another procedure would be a cold water shock treatment, where they would wrap you up in towels, put you in a bathtub, restrain you in the bathtub, and pack ice around your body. Now, if you lay there in a bathtub, against your will, surrounded by blocks of ice, your body temperature is going to drop. You're going to be basically suffering from hypothermia. Well, we didn't know what that was yet back in the 19th century. Your body mechanisms would slow down. Your heart rate would slow down. Your respiratory rate would slow down. Your aggression would disappear because you're basically frozen. And that treatment, that's where we get the phrase chill out. You've heard that? Hey, just chill out. That's what comes from that treatment. So you have doctors and nurses and the medical staff trying these various crazy treatments to try to cure people. And, many times it did nothing. It wouldn't work, or it might kill you. And And they just did whatever experiment they could. The most horrific for me, and the research that I did for my book on Trans Allegheny, was the 10-minute ice pick lobotomy procedure, which was perfected by Dr. Walter Freeman, who traveled all over the U.S. bragging that he could do this quick, cheap, inexpensive, fast surgery that required nothing basically but the patient to be restrained. No medication would be given, and he would use a surgical type of an ice pick and a surgical hammer. And he would go not through the center of the forehead that you would typically see. That would require some anesthesia. He would go through the tear duct. And he would place that ice pick up next to the tear duct and tap it with a surgical hammer and go up into the frontal lobe, which would then affect the personality of that individual. So therefore, you never had to medicate that person again, because you took away their personality and you took away their aggression and their moodiness, their violent episodes. In 10 minutes, somebody's life could be changed by this man. And he went all over the state of West Virginia. I think it was the early 1950s. He did 275 procedures within the space of 1 week in West Virginia.
Wow.
And housewives were told that they would be a better wife and a better mother to their children if they would have that procedure done. So some women would come in for the procedure on their own free will, thinking that it would help them be a better woman.
Oh, that's just frightening.
It is. I remember one medical journal that I read said that there were more transorbital lobotomies done in 1 year than there were tonsillectomies in the United States.
So with this kind of, we call it what it is, basically a Nazi tactic. What is the legacy that this doctor left at the hospital? And I can understand, the patients that negative energy being confined there, but what, when you're doing your paranormal investigations of this huge building, what are you ascertaining?
Well, I think that the reason that this location has so much activity is because of the mistreatment of the patients. Some patients were held against their will. They were misdiagnosed. You had people suffering from Alzheimer's that would be taken there back in the early days, that would be put into a room with somebody that was deviant or criminally insane. And you have patients murdering other patients. There was one story where two patients held down another patient, and they picked up the end of the metal bed frame, his own bed, and put it against his skull, and the other one jumped up and down on top of the bed frame, pushing that. Yeah, so you had stuff like this. You had patients that murdered other patients. You had patients that committed suicide. If you had a pregnant woman, and of course this did happen, the patients would get together and somebody would become pregnant. If that woman would give birth, the baby would stay with the mother until age 16. And then they were given the choice to leave if they wanted to. A lot of these people, they didn't leave. This was all that they knew. This asylum, they got a bed, they got fed, they had medication if they needed it, they were taken care of. They didn't know how to function out in the real world. So you have all of this death. You have disease, you have mistreatment, you have the murders, the suicides, and sure, you had good doctors. Sure, you had good medical staff. But, for every good doctor, I'm sure there was another one who was willing to experiment to further the field of medicine in a way that probably wasn't proper. And I think the energy from the wrongdoings to these people and their suffering, that energy is trapped in that building. Not only there, but directly behind the building, you have thousands of patients that are buried in unmarked graves. And what kind of a legacy does that leave? Thousands.
Yeah.
Thousands. You remember you had the influenza epidemic in 1917 and 1918 that killed millions of people across the world. And you had all of these people together. And a communicable disease like that and like tuberculosis would run rampant. So you have these people being buried and they're put out in this field and they were given small markers, but back in the 1970s, one of the groundskeepers decided he could mow a little bit more efficiently if he didn't have all these markers to go around, and he pulled the markers.
Oh, God.
So now you have nothing but a field, and you have unrecognized burials there. And I think that in itself speaks for just the darkness, and the heaviness and the paranormal activity that takes place in the building.
Well, I think it's in your Whipple chapter that you talk about, there's a sadness that hangs over the area. You get the same feeling with the asylum here. Just the horrible treatment of people, the dehumanization. It just seems like there's some like a crying out to be seen as a real person.
Yes. And you think of the emotions of these people over the over 100 years that this building was functioning. Think of the fear, the sadness, the hate, the anger, all of this. This is energy, people that are very faithful and religious and they believe in prayer. Prayer is energy. That's intent. You have the intent to help someone or to do good when you pray. Mm-hmm. And so think about those people, those thousands and thousands of people that were there, that prayed, that wept, that murdered other patients, that were forced to endure these horrific treatments, and all of that energy. And then again, you have a building that's made of quartz and crystal. Basically, you have a river that runs out in front of the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. So, again, the perfect recipe for paranormal activity. And as a Civil War reenactor, to go into the oldest part of the asylum, which is the Civil War area, and to realize that these men, these soldiers, were put in here with violent murderers and criminally insane people. It's sad. It's so sad, and we just didn't know any better back during that time frame.
Yeah, and when it became functional in the 1860s, when did it fortunately close? Right.
Well, they started constructing it in 1858, and it was designed after the Kirkbride plan, which means that, you've got these long sprawling hallways and beautiful gardens and things like that, because that was designed to inspire and help people and heal people. So when they built that building, it was designed to only hold 2,500 people. 250 people. 250 people. But then flash ahead to the 1950s, and you have about 2,500 people in that building that was only designed for 250. So it's uncrowded, poor conditions, and it ended up closing in 1994 just because the building deteriorated. I mean, can you imagine what it would cost to heat a building of that size? So they ended up building a new facility, and that's where the majority of the patients were taken to. And when it closed in 1994, and it sat there, closed for a while and became kind of derelict on the inside. People would break in and they would investigate, or they'd go in there and they'd do paintball wars and all kinds of crazy things and whatnot. And I remember seeing this building on eBay for sale. And I thought, oh, I'd like to have that. And then it went off of eBay for some reason, then it went up for sale, and then the Jordan family purchased it. And I think they've had it since about 2006 is when they got the building there. And they maintained the cemeteries out behind, and they have a couple 100 acres of property right there. And they do a lot of good. They do. The Jordan family does. They have a wonderful museum there on the history of psychiatry. They have renovated the inside of the building. They have added, beautiful carpets and paintings and decorated it as to the way it was back in the day. So they have done a great deal of good with their asylum purchase.
Does I don't know what the right word, a benevolent act like the Jordan family has done to bring a sense of peace or decency to a place where there's so many horrific things happen, does a act of kindness like that help to lessen or diminish the haunting, paranormal aspects of a building?
I think it's been wonderful what they have done. They have opened up the building. You have thousands of people that come from all over the world to go through the building. It's been featured on numerous documentaries and television shows and whatnot. So it's brought awareness to the mistreatment of patients back during the Victorian era. It has allowed people to walk through the hallways and see how we used to chain people to the walls and psychiatric lockdown. And I think it's like a wake-up call to many of us to see how far that we've come in the treatment of diseases and of conditions. And that's a good thing. But the paranormal activity, I think it's going to go on no matter what. I mean, I don't think you can gloss over that. It's there, and you can feel it, and you can feel it in the middle of the day. So many people have contacted me, especially during the writing of the book on TAWA, and they would email me and they'd say, "Hey, we captured something on our photographs, and we just took a day tour. Could you take a look at the picture for me?" Or they'll email me with something that happened while they were just walking around on the grounds outside. They hadn't even gone into the building yet. So, it doesn't have to be the middle of the night or midnight or 3 a.m. or the witching hour or whatever you want to conjure up in your mind for activity to happen. It can happen when you're just walking around during the day. And I think it's just a nudge, from the other side as to, hey, we're still here. You can still feel us. You can still feel the sadness. What happened to us was not right. You can liken that to Gettysburg or Fredericksburg or Antietam, any of these battlefields. You get out of your car, driving across Gettysburg is one thing to look out your window, but once you get out of your car and you walk across that battlefield, so many people are moved to tears because they can feel, the sadness of over 50,000 people that died on that field. You can feel it.
Mm-hmm.
It's there. It's almost atmospheric.
Okay, so TAWA is one of your centerpieces of your literary canon. It's a moving experience to hear you discuss, the variety of reasons for people being there, and so much of it stems from the Civil War, as well as just people not understanding behaviors at that time. But you do just a fantastic job of recreating that. About 130-year period in which it was a functioning hospital, but one of your big projects as a tour company director is your Celtic Crossing trips.
Oh, yes.
And you are taking people on these trips to Irish and Scottish castles. We need to hear a little bit about.
Oh, sure.
I maybe do we have to skip the any stories associated with the Guinness Brewery?
That's where we combine spirits and spirits. Get it?
Okay. We we may have to say that for like a really late show. But let's just maybe just stick with just the castle.
Oh, sure.
And
yeah.
So tell us a little bit, like, if we're to fly over there and go on this trip, what are we going to encounter?
Well, the first time I went to Ireland and Scotland was in 2014, and I took my husband over. It was his 50th birthday gift. What a great gift, right? Mm-hmm. We were over there for 10 days, and we did a boat ride across Loch Ness, which has been a paranormal bucket list thing for me for many years, and fell in love with it. And I knew that I wanted to put together some kind of a adventure for people to sign up and go with me. So in my mind, back in 2014, I started composing a haunted Ireland trip and a Celtic crossing trip, which was Ireland and Scotland. This September, I have a haunted Ireland trip that takes place. So when we fly out of Cleveland, Ohio, and it's September of this year. It's 8 days and 7 nights, and we explore across Ireland. We do Dublin and Galway and the Hill of Tara, where the ancient kings were crowned. We go to Glasnevin Cemetery, where there's millions of people buried in Dublin. There are more people buried in Glasnevin Cemetery than there are living in Dublin, which is that's another show in itself. Glasnevin Cemetery. It's a fascinating place. But for the Celtic Crossing trip, I have 2 of those scheduled for 2021. One is in the springtime. It is sold out. We have 45 people who have already committed to that. So we went ahead and we're doing a fall trip in September, a Celtic Crossing in 2021. And what the Celtic Crossing trip is we start off in Dublin, and of course we do the Dublin Storehouse, the brewery there, the maker of Guinness, which we'll talk about that some other time. But we take off and we do locations such as Leap Castle. Leap Castle is supposed to be the most haunted castle in Europe on some lists. On other lists, it's just the most haunted castle in Ireland. But it is privately owned, and we go there. We do a boat ride across Loch Ness in Scotland. We have a stop at Stirling Castle in Scotland, a stop in Edinburgh Castle in Scotland, and we visit Baymore Stones in Northern Ireland. And these are stones that were discovered by a farmer. It's on his property. And in Ireland, they dig peat, and they dry the peat out of the ground, and that's how they burn their fires. So you have a peat farmer who owns all this acreage, and he's out digging, and he discovers these stones. And they date back to the Bronze Age. They date back, estimations are 2000 to 1200 BC, and there are 7 stone circles stuck up in this field. So we go up there, and we have a local psychic who hops on the bus with us, and she travels out to Baymore Stones. It's in County Tyrone in Northern Ireland. And we go out there, and she does some energy work with us. She shows us how to use the dowsing rods and the pendulums and things like that so that people can kind of feel the energy of the stones. So the trip in itself is 10 days and 9 nights, and we are all over the place. We go into the catacombs under Edinburgh and Scotland, and that is pretty creepy in itself, because Edinburgh is basically a city built on top of a city. So when you go down into the underground, you're in the old original city part. And boy, does it have a vibe. It's got a feel all its own. And that's one of the highlights of the trip for me, is that and the boat ride across Loch Ness. So it's a lot of fun. And my goal with these trips is to educate people and enlighten them and entertain them and put them amongst all of this old, ancient history. That one site that we go to on the Haunted Ireland trip this September coming up is Clonmacnoise. It is in County Offaly. It's an old monastic site, and it dates back to, I want to say probably around 500. And it's beautiful. It's on the River Shannon. It is a very, very early Christian site.
Is that one that has a round tower?
Yes, it has a round tower, and it has some Celtic crosses there, and it's just fascinating. You wander the grounds there. You think you're thinking about monks and the manuscripts and these beautiful Celtic stones that were built that are still standing, and it's fascinating to walk in the footprints of the ancients in that way. And that is a very, very, it's off the beaten path. It's kind of like Zoar in Ohio. You don't see major tour buses pulling up and people getting out. And every time that I've been there, it has not been crowded. The first time I was there, as a matter of fact, it was just our tour group. Nobody else was walking around. And, it dates back to 545. Beautiful cathedral, the round tower that you spoke of, high crosses. And it was said to be like the leading center of religion and learning in all of Europe at the time that it was established. So it's a very sacred site.
Okay, and is this monastic ruin haunted, or is that just a place where you
no,
just?
it's a sacred site, so it's an energy site. But there is some folklore. There is there's the ruins of a church building there on the site, and if you stand in one of the doorways in this ruin, you're supposed to be able to hear the mumblings and the murmurs of ancient ones praying. So there's that, not to say that it's haunted, but it is a mysterious earth energy site. I believe that the ancient peoples, the early people, could feel this energy, and that is where they put their places of worship, or their burial grounds, or Stonehenge, or any of these ancient sites. I believe that they could sense this energy, and that's why they chose these locations. And it thrills me to take people there with me and to explain to them a little bit of the history, and let everybody wander around and maybe have an experience on top of all of it.
Okay, and when you go to Stirling Castle, what is the draw there? It's also surrounded by volcanic peaks, or extinct volcanoes, really.
Yes, yeah. It sits up on top of a very large volcanic rock above the River Forth, and that was the meeting point between the lowlands and the highlands. So this is a very ancient, commanding, powerful stronghold site that sits over the countryside. And when you're up in the castle and you're looking out those windows, you can see places like Stirling Bridge and Bannockburn. And if anybody's seen movies with about Robert the Bruce or William Wallace and Braveheart, anything like that, you're familiar with those battles, and you can see those from up top. Fascinating place. It was a childhood home of Mary Queen of Scots, which could be a whole other show in itself, because that's a pretty cool time frame there in history, in Scottish history. And it's definitely one of the must-see visitor attractions, for people to go to. Now, with it being a stronghold, that it was attacked. That there was violence that occurred there. And people were murdered. People were shoved out of castle windows. People were executed. So you've got that dark history, again, of a very old site with hundreds and hundreds of years of violence taking place within its walls.
Okay.
And not only that, it's wonderful to wander the hallways of the castle and touch the stone and see the tapestries on the wall. And the times that we have been there, they've had costumed docents and interpreters that are walking around, telling stories and sharing the history of the castle with the visitors. So it's a very cool experience. It's said to be haunted. Of course, various people have reported seeing the image of Mary Queen of Scots wandering through the hallways, and multiple things. There's a very large cemetery down below the castle proper as well. It's very, very old, with many beautiful tombs and monuments and statues, and I could walk for hours down there. As a matter of fact, when we stop, I usually spend more time in the castle below, in the cemetery below, than I do, up inside the castle itself. Mark, you've got to make it over there sometime. I don't think you'd want to leave.
No, I've been to Scotland a couple times. I really enjoy it, and the Edinburgh Castle is another one of your stops, and you realize that you have a family connection to the area. Can you tell us a little bit about your return home to the motherland?
Right. Well, the first time I'd went over there, as I said earlier, was 2014, and I knew that I had, Scots-Irish blood. I had done my DNA, of course, and I knew I was, 65% British and Irish and Scottish. So I've always felt that connection, and I, for some reason, always felt a connection to Edinburgh Castle. Well, I discovered this past year that my 26th great-grandparents lived in the castle, which is pretty cool to be able to say I've got documented proof, I've got DNA. They lived there, and my grandmother passed away in the castle in 1040. And her name was Margaret. My grandmother Margaret was married to my grandfather Malcolm, who was the third king of Scotland, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
But to find out, as I wandered the hallways, before I even knew the story of my grandmother passing away, I was always drawn to Edinburgh Castle. It's one of those deja vu things when you're walking down the hallway, you're like, oh, I felt like I've been down this hallway before. Well, I'm thinking maybe I saw it on television, maybe it was in a documentary, maybe it was in a movie, and it's like I knew where I was going. And then to find out that I have this bloodline connection and that my grandmother passed away in the castle makes me wonder about deja vu, cell memory, the ability for your body to remember something from the past. It makes me think about past lives. And, I firmly believe that connection that I felt is one from this, and it's documented. So I really look forward to going back to Edinburgh Castle and to walking around and being where my grandparents lived and they ruled. Not only is the castle haunted, you can talk to any amount of tour guides there, or people that have volunteered, and hear multiple stories of the lady in blue that wanders the hall, or the violence that has occurred out in front of the castle where they used to burn the witches, make a big spectacle of that out in front of the castle. And it's such an impressive building and a stronghold sitting up there on, again, a big block of volcanic rock over top of the castle and at the end of the Royal Mile. And I look forward to going back there and exploring some more in 2021. And if people are interested in, going along with me for that fall trip in 2021 to Ireland and Scotland, they can and visit my website. And all the information is there at hauntedhistory.net.
Very good. And if I make it back to Scotland, one of the places I saw from Stirling Castle, but I didn't make it over, get a bus out to Dune Castle. But you've been there, and that was actually Dune Castle was actually used as one of the settings for Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Right, and Game of Thrones and Outlander.
Okay, so you've been there. What was I just couldn't see the castle from 15 miles away. What's it like up close?
Well, to tell you the truth, I have been there and only on the outside, because it seems like every time that we pull up, they've closed. So we're hoping that in 2021 we're going to make sure that we get there before the place closes, and actually get inside to explore. So it's been kind of mostly like a photo stop to get out, and it's cool. Being a fan of Game of Thrones and of Outlander and of Monty Python, to actually visit one of the movie sets. So that was a thrill anyway, just to stand out there. But I would like to get in. I want to check out the kitchen because it's supposed to be pretty cool, and the Great Hall, and all of that. So I hope to have a full report to you maybe next time I'm on.
Okay. No, I would. You're welcome to come back and talk all about that. I actually, this, since we're, this is just one of my usual rants about something that may seem irrelevant, but we are talking about Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and just this within the last week, Terry Jones passed away. He's part of and some of the, he's one of the characters in the spam skit, and he was in the nudge skit as well. But what a lot of people, I really didn't realize what a serious historian he was, until I was, my Chaucer college professor was highly recommending his book. And it was like this analysis of Chaucer's The Night.
Really?
Yeah. And it was
that's a surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he went on to write. He co-authored a book with I think it's several other. I should have brought it in here. I didn't realize I was going to just go into one of these segues. But yeah, I think it's like there might have been like 4, 5, 6 authors, but it was actually I think the title of the book is "Who Murdered Chaucer," and it was looking at a theory that some of Chaucer's kind of like anti-church jokes brought about the disapproval of church figures. But it was Terry Jones. Since we are talking about Monty Python, it was Terry actually had those 2 Chaucerian themed books.
That's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, they're worth the read. So, okay,
that is interesting.
So, and what did you think about being on Loch Ness? That's kind of like the major cryptid site.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I have been on Loch Ness 6 times, I believe. Not that I'm bragging about it. I feel blessed to have ever even been on it once. It's fascinating, the history of the area. The banning of the monster from the river, from River Ness to Loch Ness. I mean, that's part of the folklore of the area. But to actually be on the boat and to be looking at they've got all these flat screen TVs set up where you can watch the sonar, and you can see as you pull away from shore on this boat, and it's a 2-level boat, so you can go up top, and put your face out in the breeze or the Scottish rain or whatever, and look for Nessie while you're up top. But as you pull away from the shore, and you're sitting there and you're watching the sonar, and it starts off at 40 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet, 400 feet, rather quickly, and you see the depths show up, and you're like, holy cow, this lake is huge, and it's very deep. And as you look at the the landscape around you and how remote you are, you can understand why things would be able to survive in that lake that have not been proven to exist yet. It's massive. It's massive, and
the water's so dark.
It's
too.
Dark. It's very brackish, dark, brown, black. And I think every time I've been on the boat, it has rained just a little bit or had a good Scottish mist going as I go up top. And a funny story about the last time I was on the boat. Of course, I've got 45 people on this boat with me. We've been traveling together, and it's interesting. They have a bar on the boat, so you can drink as you're looking out the window to find Nessie, which I think is kind of funny. But I'm looking around for my husband. I got 45 people on this boat, and there's only 2 places he could really be on the first level of the boat and up top. And I'm looking all over the place, and I'm like, I can't find him anywhere. And I see him like 20 minutes later, and I'm like, where have you been? He said, they let me drive the boat. And I'm like, what? He goes, I've been navigating the boat for the last half hour. So that was his big thrill, was being able to navigate the boat on Loch Ness.
Well, how did Perry finagle that deal?
I'm not sure. I'm entertaining and talking to my group of 45 people, and he mysteriously disappears. But he's an engineer, so and he's was a dive master years ago, and I'm sure that he got up there and started talking to the captain, and I think the captain said, you want to take it from here for a little bit, and I'm sure he jumped right on that.
Okay.
Because that would never happen here in the States. If you went out on a lake somewhere on a guided tour boat, they would never hand the boat over to somebody that they didn't know.
Look what happened.
Different over there.
Look what happened when the skipper gave the wheel to Gilligan.
Right. This is true.
So, okay. So we you're been touring Loch Ness. It's supposedly since the 5th century, Saint Aidan, is that the right? Had like the first documented sighting of Nessie.
Right. Yeah.
Is that
the history goes.
Brendan.
I'm trying to. No. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I'm a little foggy.
Yeah.
It'll come to me probably.
I haven't been been smacked in the forehead with a 2x4.
Yeah. Right.
Today. I just completely forgot the saint's name. But
is it Kieran? I'm trying to remember who.
I don't.
Columba. It's Columba.
That's it.
It came to me.
Yeah.
Yes, because I remember there is a hotel along the River Ness called the Columba, and we have stayed there when we've been over there on tour. So it was St. Columba that banned this serpent-like monster from the River Ness and banned it back to the lake because people were freaking out. This creature had come close to shore and had nabbed a fisherman. and there were witnesses that saw it. So there was a great fear of this creature, and he supposedly went out into the river and banned it and forced it to go back up into the lock, up into the lake.
Yeah, and this was documented in like about the 5th century.
500. I'm trying to remember too. Mid 550 maybe, something like that. 550, 560.
So what do we make of this early cryptid documentation by someone who would go on to be canonized? You would expect the person to be trustworthy in what they're saying or writing in their illuminated manuscripts.
Mhm. Right. And and the story goes, the legend, the folklore with the whole situation with St. Columba was that there was a man that was swimming in the river, and he was attacked by a water beast of some sort. And this beast drug him under the water, and everybody saw this happening, and they tried to rescue him by boat, and he was killed. And Columba came out, and the beast approached Columba, and Columba made the sign of the cross and said, go away, don't touch this man, leave. And the witnesses said that it was as if that the creature had been pulled back with ropes or invisible, some type of force field pulled this creature back, and they believed that it was some type of a miracle. So and it's folklore. It's folklore, but it has been documented. So what do we believe? I look at everything that's been documented that was supposed to happen in the Bible. Whole other show there too, right?
Right. We've touched on that earlier too, and Barbara said there, we have about 2 minutes left, so your memory was really sharp, sharper than I just completely forgot St. Columba's names. I don't think you have as much brain damage as I do. So,
thanks.
That's a special nightlight. Welcome to you. So, how about you give everyone your website, contact information, and Barbara could step in and wrap up the show. And I just want to thank you so much, Sherri, for being a wonderful guest.
Oh, Mark, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on, and I hope to be back in the future. And if folks are interested in, thank you. But if folks are interested in my tours and the classes and presentations and events that I do, they can check it out at hauntedhistory.net. I'm also on Facebook under Sherri Brake, and Haunted Heartland Tours, and on Instagram, and all that good stuff. So, my phone number is at the website, my email address is at the website, and I answer the phone and I answer emails and all that good stuff. So I love hearing from people. And thank you, Barbara and Mark, again for having me on tonight.
Well, it was our pleasure, and thank you so much for being here. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I want to go castle hunting now. But for now tonight, thank you so much, everybody, for listening in. We really enjoyed having you with us, and I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did. So have a great evening. Take care, and we will talk to you next Monday and Tuesday. Good night now.